Hi everyone, welcome to Miss Adams Teaches Macbeth, Act 5, Scene 8, the penultimate scene of the whole play. So very quick plot summary for you here. This is all about the fight between Macbeth and Macduff. Macbeth is on stage alone at the very beginning. He is quickly met by Macduff. They have a skirmish of words, which we'll look at shortly. And in the end, Macduff wins the fight and manages to slay Macbeth. So let's have a little look at some of the detail of this scene. Okay, so one of the things that's really important is to look at how Macbeth and Macduff differ. In the previous scene, we saw the way that Macduff viewed the soldiers around him that weren't on his side. And we also get to see the same thing here with Macbeth. So Macbeth says, "While I see lives, the gashes do better on them," which basically means whilst he sees people alive around him, he'd much prefer to hurt them than allow them to hurt him, which to a degree is fair enough. But when you compare it to Macduff in the previous scene, where he says, "I cannot strike at wretched kerns whose arms are hired to bear their staves," it demonstrates how different they are. Macbeth is willing to kill anyone he sees around him, whereas Macduff is trying very hard to not commit any violence unless it's Macbeth himself. Now, Macduff shortly enters the scene and immediately on seeing Macbeth calls him a hellhound, says, "Turn, hellhound, turn." And before they get into the major fight, they have this discussion where Macbeth says to him, "My soul is too much charged with blood of thine already." So we've got this metaphor here, that the idea that the soul, his soul, is too much burdened or has already been affected by too much blood. And when he says blood of thine, he is of course referring to Macduff's family. Now, there's a little part of this that almost sounds like regret or remorse, the idea of the soul being charged, but actually I think what he's trying to do is antagonise Macduff further. Macduff says, "I have no words, my voice is in my sword." So another metaphor here, but basically what he is saying is he's not interested in this in any kind of skirmish of words. His voice, his power, his way of communicating is through his sword, i.e. any back and forth in argument is going to be done physically, violently. Now, you might ask yourself, well, is Macbeth bringing about his fate here? And it's another example where his overconfidence is leading him to provoke a man who is already fueled by his desire for vengeance, and he's reminding him of all of the family that he's murdered. So, perhaps not the best idea. And then we get to the major twist in this scene, but also of the entire play. Of course, we already know that the witches have tricked Macbeth because of the way that the prophecy about Birnam Wood came to fruition, but there's still the third prophecy left, or the words of the apparition that we need to consider. Now, Macbeth tells Macduff that he lives a charmed life. He's got nothing to worry about, and explains why. And Macduff's retort, "Despair thy charm, and let the angel whom thou still hast served tell thee, Macduff was from his mother's womb untimely ripped." Oh, shock horror. Okay. What we've got here is the recognition, the understanding that Macduff technically wasn't born by his mother, because this little section here where it talks about the untimely ripping of Macduff from his mother's womb, that tells us that he was actually born through C-section. So technically the male doctor bore him. Now, if you were writing about this, you might want to talk about the imperatives at the beginning, the despair thy charm, let the angel, so, and again, tell thee, so imperative sentences. This angel that he's sort of ironically referring to, you might remember from earlier on in the play, he talked about his genius. It's this guiding spirit. So he's like, you think you've had this guiding spirit? Well, they can tell you. Okay, but calling it an angel is ironic because, of course, what we know has been driving or guiding Macbeth has been these creatures of darkness. So yes, a big twist here where we recognise that the witches have ultimately tricked him completely. All of those prophecies have had loopholes, which mean that we now know that it's going to be Macduff that slays Macbeth. So initially, on hearing the truth from Macduff, Macbeth decides that he won't fight. In fact, he says quite straightforwardly, "I'll not fight with thee," which means that Macduff has to almost like taunt him into action. He calls him a coward. He says that he'll be sort of presented, painted upon a pole, given as something to be displayed for people to laugh and mock at, which does the trick, because Macbeth says, "I will not yield, so I'll not give up, to kiss the ground before young Malcolm's feet and be baited with the rabble's curse." So in the end, what motivates Macbeth to fight Macduff is not winning, is not about saving himself or his kingship. It's again about that sense of reputation and identity. He doesn't want his lasting legacy to be one that is mocked and jeered and scorned at. He'd rather go out, yes, as the tyrant, but still go out fighting. So it comes back to that idea again about the tragic conventions and that idea of a loop being made. Although he has not come back to that sense of goodness and nobility, he has restored himself back to that kind of ferocious and skilled warrior. But in this case, of course, he is not successful, and the scene ends with Macbeth killed by Macduff, and Macduff leaving with his body. So this penultimate scene draws again some of those big themes together. Conflict, clearly, because we're actually seeing that final battle on stage, this battle that we've been waiting for as Birnam Wood and the soldiers have been marching towards. We again have that kind of sense of righteousness. Last scene it was from young Seward. This time round it's coming from Macduff. And you've got those clear, defining factions. Good Macduff versus evil Macbeth coming together in this big climactic moment. And I also want to draw your attention to that big theme of appearance versus reality, where we began right at the beginning with fair is foul and foul is fair. This idea that things aren't as they seem. Macbeth thought that he was invincible because none of woman born could harm him, but the reality is in fact that he wasn't invincible. There was one man who was always going to do the job, and he was born by C-section. So the reality has finally come through. One more scene to go. Hopefully that was useful to you. If you haven't subscribed, please do so you can see all of the new videos coming up. If you've got any requests, send me a little message in the comment. Thank you so much for watching. Happy revising.